How many times have you heard a piece of media, or even a person be referred to like this? Oh my god, that's so edgy. Probably more than once, right? It's pretty much ingrained in online language to the point we can't imagine a time when it wasn't used as frequently. But there was a time like that, and it was everything before 2006, at least according to Google Trends. But let me hit you with another question. What does edgy mean? Like, when you call a person edgy, what are you trying to say? How would you describe them? If I were to guess, you would most likely conjure some emo, MCR listening, skull and notebook writing, blood oath making, wrist slitting, black hair dyeing, anorexic, hot topic shopping, albino hipster teen who hides behind the school during lunchtime to smoke. And while what I just listed is a stereotypical application of the term, it fits with the dictionary definition, i.e. having a bold, provocative, or unconventional quality/qualities. Now take that idea of edginess in your head and apply it as a criticism of something. What do you usually assume when someone says a piece of media is too edgy? Maybe it's really violent, has tons of sex and drugs and all manner of vices? Well, I'm gonna go ahead and say that if that's what you think it means when you call something edgy, and that makes it lesser as a product, then the way you're applying the term, in my opinion, isn't valid as a criticism. Sure, on a technical level, something with those themes could be considered edgy by the simplest dictionary definitions, but what I left out about all those descriptions of what we think should be scrutinized as edgy is this. The reason we make fun of or criticize these ideas presented isn't their existence in the first place, or at least it shouldn't, but rather we do so based on how unnecessary we think they are. We all know the upper middle class kid who can afford to do all this emo shit doesn't feel the need to cause he's actually a tortured soul whose life sucks, meaning he needs to numb himself. No, he's doing it to be cool. He wants attention. He wants to be part of a group. That's what his image is built on, and it contradicts the message he's trying to convey, so we laugh at him. It's the same as seeing far-right politicians with web browsers full of hentai. They've set up a certain image for themselves, and the fact we know they aren't genuine about it makes them fun to laugh at. The same goes for media. Edge is at its most funny when it's pointless and overly excessive. The ending of the anime School Days is incredibly funny because it follows these blank slates of characters over 12 agonizing episodes, and then, out of nowhere, they brutally kill each other. The intended effect here is that we're supposed to tear up and cry that these characters are doing such a thing to one another, or we should be shocked that such a thing could happen in the first place. But it's so out of nowhere and so obviously an attempt to get some half-baked emotional resonance at the end of the series that we can't help but find it hilarious and memorable for that reason alone. That's what I'd say is worthy of being called edgy in a negative sense. On the other hand, what I don't think should have that title is a series like Chainsaw Man, which has tons of weird, gross, or insane imagery in it, but there's a purpose behind the madness, and so you can't say it's just being edgy for edgy's sake. And in a similar, though honestly way more extreme degree than that, there's one series I know that's absolutely caked from top to bottom in adult themes, excessive violence, the deepest depths of the blackness in the human heart. And without those things present, the story it told would never have come out the same way. And that's the manga series Berserk by Kentaro Miura. Following Guts the Black Swordsman, Berserk is the story of a man who only wants to live with a purpose of his own. But from the start of the series, all he can do for the time being is run from and fight the demons after his head, who won't stop until he's been killed to act as a sacrifice, which he escaped from long ago, but still bears a mark that flares up whenever those demons come near. It's widely considered one of the most gorgeous, well-written, provocative manga series ever created, and while it'd be an almost impossible task for me to cover everything the series has to say, kinda like trying to keep a consistent upload schedule, there are some quote-unquote edgy attributes I want to talk about that help in making the series as impactful as it is. Attributes that the series wouldn't be the same without and need to be there for the story being told. Specifically, I want to discuss how one arc in the series, the Golden Age arc, effectively uses the ideas of sexuality to present themes of lust, greed, forced identity, healing, and even more, all through the perspectives of the main leads and how the topic itself is used to develop them as people, for better and for worse. Right now I'm going to be putting up a major spoiler warning for the Golden Age arc, since obviously I'll be discussing it in depth under the assumption you know the basics of the lore and characters. If you don't want to be spoiled, click off now, but for those willing to press on, keep in mind I'll have to do some slight tiptoeing around this as best I can to avoid the algorithm's wrath. It might be a pointless task, but I'm still gonna try. That being said, how about we first take a look at how intimacy is infused with the character of Guts. From the beginning of Guts' life, he had it hard. He was born under the tree a dead woman hung from. His foster mom died of the plague when he was 3, and his foster dad raised him to fight in battles alongside a band of mercenaries, disproportionately blaming him for the death of his wife. And worst of all, after building a trust with Guts and making him finally feel like he belonged, Guts' foster dad sold him to another soldier for the night at the tender age of 9. This violation shapes Guts in a pivotal way, as it remains something in the back of his mind for years to come. And in the moment, as a vulnerable child, part of what he remembered most is how vulnerable he truly was, unable to even grab his sword as he was taken advantage advantage of. So from that point, Guts becomes more keen on using violence to solve his issues and survive. The day after the incident, he kills a soldier, making it look like a casualty of war, and 2 years later, after getting into a fight with his foster dad that ends up killing him, Guts has to go off on his own for a while, in a way going on autopilot, only knowing how to fight and shut others out, because if he's weak for even a second, if he lets someone so much as touch him, that could be his undoing. That could be when all his memories come rushing back and he has to face the undeserved guilt instilled into him by his foster father, who treated him terribly to forget his own issues. Of course, that isolation can't last forever, as Guts is picked up by Griffith, the leader of a merc group called the Band of the Hawk, who wants Guts to help him accomplish his own goals. But before Guts even knows who Griffith is, he gets acquainted with one of the Hawk's most valuable members, the female captain, Casca. What makes their interaction so unique starting out is that when the Hawk took him in after sustaining major injuries, Casca was forced to warm him for a period of days before he woke up. The fact she had to do something meant explicitly for a woman, an identity she'd cast aside to become a merc, angers Casca, and makes her already dislike Guts from the start, thinking he brings out the side of her she doesn't want to see. On Guts' side though, it's later discovered that after the event, Guts only ever felt comfortable having Casca touch him, maybe calling back to the imagery of Guts sleeping with a sword by his side starting from when he was a young kid, feeling protected in a way while he was so vulnerable, having Casca to fill that role with the sword not there. And I swear if I see any innuendos about Casca and Guts' sword, I will eat you alive. This helps him to later establish a connection with Casca, unlike the other Hawk members, as the two of them are consistently put in situations where they have to confront their own physical or emotional weaknesses, metaphorically and literally showing the scars they've gotten over the lives they've led, making their eventual reunion a year after Guts left the Hawk all the more impactful. For those who don't remember, at this point, Casca has pretty much had it with being leader and doesn't want to carry on any longer for the dream of someone who may not even be alive. So she tries to let herself die, but Guts won't allow it, embracing Casca and making it so she can just feel the joy of being alive. This is without a doubt the most positive depiction of intercourse in the arc, but even in this moment of shared healing, Guts remembers his trauma and strangles Casca when finally reliving what he so long tried to forget, still blaming his past self for his foster father's death. It's kind of a good representation for the arc as a whole in that even during the highest of levity, the crushing weight of reality will bring it back down. For me, that's when I work super hard on a video like this and it gets 10 out of 10 in analytics, but jokes aside, it is emotionally important for Guts, and that's equally the case for Casca. As mentioned when talking about her introduction, Casca has always faced the challenge of being considered a woman when her ideology stakes herself on abandoning that and any other factors that could make her be seen as lesser. She doesn't want to be singled out among the Hawks for being weak, attempting to cast all those bits she believes detriments aside to be seen as nothing other than a warrior on the battlefield. But on many occasions during the arc, she'll be accosted by enemies that condescend to her for not having a dick. And that kind of interaction always reminds her of the so-called detriment she can never fully conceal, which stings all the more knowing her backstory. Casca's story reveals that she was sold by her family and almost taken advantage of by a noble before Griffith showed up, making her fight for her own freedom instead of letting someone else do it for her, which shaped Casca's belief that womanly qualities made her vulnerable, therefore wanting to hide them so that she could be there for Griffith, who gave her the will to fight in the first place. She wants to be Griffith's sword, an indispensable soldier to him who's needed above all others for reaching his dream, and that helps us understand why she'd be so upset at having to perform the duties of a woman for Guts, who Griffith seems to have more of a vested interest in than her. She feels displaced when Guts comes into the picture, like all she's worked for to both be seen as needed by Griffith and not as a sexualized object have been undermined by his presence. And that makes one of their following scenes together genius. In short, Casca gets her period, and in trying to both not be seen as a woman and someone Griffith can't do without, she tries to hide it poorly and ends up needing to be saved by Guts. Mentally, this, at first, really messes with Casca, since she had to be saved by the person she thinks Griffith values over her, who also, through his selfish actions, she thinks brings him down in the process. She wants to be better, and seen as more valuable than Guts for the sake of Griffith, yet she had to be saved by him due to her feminine attributes, making her wonder if she could even be the pillar she wants to be. Guts doesn't just brush off her concerns when she voices them though. It makes him genuinely reflect, and he's able to turn Casca's thinking around, believing that her knowing what dreams she wants to pursue is infinitely more impressive than any feat of strength he could pull off, envying her solidified dream the same way she does for his strength. It's here where the two discover just how similar their struggles and identities really are, and from that point you can see them slowly getting closer, not seeming to even realize themselves how much they're beginning to mean to one another. And those feelings culminate in the same scene I mentioned in Guts' section, where Casca feels lost and like she can't go on any further before Guts reaches out to save her. It's a moment she drops any previous notions about throwing her womanhood away, embracing the person she is to comfort someone as emotionally damaged as her, to be Guts' sword rather than Griffith's, to symbolize the thing he needs to be safe. And despite in doing so Guts relives his trauma, it remains beautiful. And that makes it all the more heartbreaking when we see what happens next. But to get there, we first need to finally get into Griffith. If there were one way to describe Griffith as a character, it's that he's a man of unshakable conviction. Starting from when he was a child, the one thing he strove for was getting his own kingdom. It didn't matter if he was a peasant kid who came from nothing. It didn't matter what kind of sacrifices he had to make, he would reach that kingdom, no matter what hurdles he had to jump. And part of that sacrifice included giving his body to rich, deplorable men. Why? Because armies cost money. Campaigns need cash to follow through. Without that, the Band of the Hawk would never be able to reach the point they did. So Griffith saw it as nothing less than necessary in the beginning to help accomplish his goals. But unlike Guts and Casca, who both had emotional moments of vulnerability related to intimacy, Griffith had no emotional connection to the loss of his body because he chose to give it up and, thanks to his unshakable will, therefore had no hang-ups about the act. It left quite literally no impact on him one way or another, as is shown by how he interacts with one of those same men later on and doesn't display an ounce of emotion on his face or through his words, indicating that he was always in control of his actions and chose not to regret his decisions. It's definitely an extreme way of showing off that facet of Griffith's character, but considering the time period Berserk takes place in and the extent to which Griffith's dream is being presented here, I'd say it's the right level of intensity for us to truly get the scope of how far he'd be willing to go. Anything went for his dream after all. That is, until Guts decided to leave. In the overall timeline for the Golden Age arc, there's no better moment that encapsulates the tipping point for Griffith's character better than the moment Guts decides to leave. I'm by no means exaggerating when I say it really is when everything started going to shit in a basket. Basically, in order for Guts to leave, he had to beat Griffith in a fight, the same kind of fight he originally lost to become Griffith's in the first place, and when Guts surprisingly comes out on top, it gives the audience our first taste of Griffith not being in control of a situation he desperately wants to. More than that though, by seeing inside the head of Griffith, we can tell the reason he lost the fight to begin with wasn't just some spontaneous moment of lost control, but he was actually too confident in his own abilities, not realizing the extent Guts could go to beat him. Like Casca had said multiple times in the story, Guts made Griffith act more erratically, and that's no different here. He wanted to have his cake and eat it too, ruling his kingdom with Guts by his side whether Guts wanted to or not. So with him gone, Griffith decided the best option would be to throw the cake out entirely. Guts had become too far entwined with his dream to the point he overshadowed it, so Griffith decided that without him, there was no dream, and went forward with doing something that near made sure that dream could never come true no matter what. He decided to do it with Princess Charlotte. You see, as part of his original master plan, Griffith had been wooing the Princess of Midland in hopes that one day he would find a way to marry her and become royalty, but by prematurely having her at his current status, that act would be seen as high treason and take away all of his achievements thus far. Pretty much, Griffith doing it with Charlotte was him ostensibly giving up, so as he does it, we, the audience, can only think about the tragedy of the act rather than the act itself, since there was no love or hatred involved, not even lust. Just regret on Griffith's part and the manipulation of the princess. Once again, he's taking advantage of somebody else's wants in the form of sex for the purpose of fulfilling his own desires. It just so happens that in this case, he's doing it for destructive reasons, making for a good parallel to when Griffith was more in control before, whereas here, he uses those tactics to act out in impulsivity. That's not the most well-known moment of Griffith acting out a destructive idea in an unhealthy, shocking way, however. It's not exactly the most fun moment to talk about in Berserk's history, but it is iconic, and considering the video's topic, it'd be almost impossible for me to go without mentioning. During the Eclipse, where Griffith sacrifices the Band of the Hawk in order to gain powers as the 5th member of the most powerful demons in Berserk, the God Hand, he arises as a Black Phoenix Femto and afterwards proceeds to forcefully take Casca while Guts watches and struggles to stop it. So the best question to ask when it comes to this scene beyond what the fuck is why? For what reason would Griffith have to do this kind of thing in such a cruel manner as he did? Spite. Spite from believing that Guts blinded Griffith to his dream and therefore deserved to be sacrificed and tortured alongside the other Hawks so he could gain wings and reach the places he never could before, doing as he seemingly always did and climbed over bodies to go where he so desperately reached. This is all speaking from the manipulation of the God Hand, of course. In reality, Griffith never had to go down the route of destroying the Hawks, but the fact he did and blames Guts for everything that happened to him represents all the major flaws of his character, perfectly showcasing his inability to take responsibility for the choices of his that don't work out. Instead, blaming those around him for trying to be on his level, thinking that they must have ruined his plan or something like that. Having that aspect of his personality flamed and exacerbated so he would sacrifice the Hawks to begin with. That's part of why we hate Griffith and why this scene is so iconic. That's not the only reason though, which you should have guessed by now since moments like this in Berserk almost never have just one meaning, but seriously, it also depicts Griffith's drunkenness on power, making him feel like he could take whatever it was he previously wanted, including Casca, who he fantasized about having a family with shortly before the Eclipse. There were always underlying feelings between Casca and Griffith, but he was never able to participate because he planned on marrying Charlotte. But with that restriction now removed, he felt like he could do whatever, and started by taking one of the few things he believed was once impossible for him to have, destroying the relationship between Guts and Casca by making her revert to a speechless, amnesiac, childlike version of herself, completely forgetting who Guts even is, and it makes sense. Casca saw Griffith as an almost godly figure starting from the moment she met him, inspiring her to strive towards being stronger than she once was. So having him do something so unthinkable to her, using her as an object for his desires in front of the person she loves, the person she originally used such an act for the purpose of healing with, it's no wonder she'd lose herself and become broken as a person. As a matter of fact, Griffith in this moment is doing the very thing he stopped the rich noble from doing to Casca when they first met, having asked the noble if he was chosen by God. So he's also making a statement that he was chosen by God and can do what he pleases. Man, there's just so much meaning behind this scene in the context of the story and how it relates back to characters while shaping the future of the plot along with it. You understand so much with almost no dialogue because of the brilliant visual storytelling tying together previously established themes, displayed through the corruption of intimacy during a time of hopelessness, providing a perfectly bitter conclusion to the arc that wouldn't have been as impactful if it were depicted almost any other way. Intimacy, and more broadly sexuality, is incredibly important in Berserk because it gives the audience an immediately understandable showcasing of the world through visuals alone. How something that can be used to signify passion and love is, more often than not in this universe, used for lust, control, dominance, and above all else, greed. For a majority of the Golden Age arc, we see evil and wickedness depicted through either forced intimacy or the kind that's bought and sold rather than given, all being set as the norm from the very beginning and being re-established as such by the very end. Really, the only time where actual love appears is during the midpoint of the story between two characters we know are in desperate need of it. But much like the world itself, that love is corrupted through outside forces wanting that intimacy for themselves. Every usage of sexuality is incredibly intentional and for a reason, and while I'm not saying every series that uses sexuality needs to have this kind of depth to be enjoyable whatsoever, I am saying that Berserk makes better use of the concept than most. So for those who want to keep calling Berserk edgy schlock with no entertainment value, remember, go fuck yourself. I've been Just Stop. See you in the next video.